Years ago, I started having random panic attacks. They'd come out of nowhere. I'd be at a restaurant enjoying margaritas with coworkers when all of a sudden I would feel like my heart was coming out of my chest, like someone was putting their thumbs on my throat, and I became certain I was dying. It got worse. The attacks became more frequent. At one point, I asked a stranger to call 911 for me when I was on the train. I eventually saw a therapist, and one of the things he said has always stuck with me. Imagine, he said, that you're in a shadowy basement and you can barely make out something right in front of you. There are some blankets, and underneath these blankets, some things are moving. You have no idea what these things are. They could be lions, they could be ghosts, or they could be fluffy golden retriever puppies. You just don't know. Now, suppose you could press a button that instantly lifted all these blankets off of you. Well, it might be that what you had feared was actually there. Maybe it is a lion, in which case you're still no worse off than if you had just kept worrying. In fact, in this case, you can actually do something constructive and run. But more often than not, you're going to lift those things off and find out that that thing that you were terrified of was actually just a house cat. With this exercise, I found that paradoxically, the more I looked at the source of my anxiety in the eye, namely, I, Ricky McCroskey, am afraid of a heart attack, the less anxious I became. In other words, when you call something out, when you take the blanket off, it loses some of its power over you. I know you're thinking, that's great, Ricky. I did not sign up for a course in psychotherapy, and you've just droned on for a couple of minutes about it. Fair enough. But see, I found that this very same principle actually applies a lot to writing, and let me explain. Anyone who's ever written has suffered in some way or another from writer's block. It's that feeling you get when you sit down and you just struggle trying to write something. The words just won't come. You agonize, you pace, you cross things out, you delete, and it's just not happening. The well is dry. Well, the next time that happens, I'd encourage you to do this. Open up a blank Word document and write yourself one question. What am I trying to do? Write it down as if you're interviewing yourself. Now answer it. I'm trying to convince the Moores to do business with our firm. Or maybe, I'm trying to explain why the transaction is a good idea to the finance head. Or perhaps, I'm trying to summarize the meeting for my boss. Okay, great. Now write the next question. Why am I struggling? What am I struggling with? Well, I'm struggling because I'm worried the Smiths will think I'm being too zealous. Or I'm struggling because I don't know why the transaction is a good idea. Or I'm struggling because I want to keep the email short, but there was a lot that happened during the meeting and I don't want to exclude anything important. Now, at this point, keep the questions coming as if you're interviewing yourself. Now, why is it that I'm afraid of being overly zealous? Or why do I think that the transaction is a bad idea? Or what was the most important part of the meeting? As obvious and elementary as this all sounds, you would be shocked at how eye-opening it can be. Sometimes you'll write out what's bothering you, and for some strange reason, simply seeing the words written on the page has this way of refocusing you and clarifying in your mind what the real problem is and what the solution can be. In fact, I would argue that often 90% of finding a solution is really clearly articulating what the problem is. Now, the key is keep this exercise, this running diary going until you feel like you start to have a better understanding of what the issue is. You know, maybe it is that you just don't have enough information, or maybe you don't know the audience well enough, or maybe you're just plain tired. So what happened in the meeting? Well, Jen introduced the new software, Terry talked about the potential payment options, and Jeff kept asking about security vulnerabilities in the software. Then you'd write, so which of these does my boss need to know about first? It's tough to say. I suppose Jeff's questions about security were most important because he seemed to suggest there were a lot of flaws in the software. You get the point. It's a dialogue. It's as if you're interviewing yourself and really probing deeply to get at the root of what you're struggling with. If we can be ruthlessly honest with ourselves in this sort of a journal, what we're effectively doing is unmasking or taking the blanket off writer's block. We're revealing the source of it. And if you can do that, it's going to give you a new awareness into how you think. And the result is going to be greater clarity and better writing.